Well, welcome everybody to St. John's Waterloo if you're here in the building, and welcome online if you're with us virtually. It's very good to have you all here for this really important event. My name is Giles Goddard. I'm the vicar of this church, as you might be able to tell. And we're very privileged and fortunate to have Euchar Gravina as our artistic director, who has put this festival together with Aurelia and many others present. The legacy of Daphne Caruana Galizia is huge. She is such an important person. She was a really important person before she was killed, and now that she has been killed, she symbolizes so much. We here at St. John's are nothing like in the same league. We've just very recently refurbished this building, but we want it to be a place of inquiry, a place of challenge, a place of inspiration, and a place of openness. And that's why we really welcome this festival and all that you're trying to do together. Now more than ever, freedom is at stake. As I was just saying to Burhan, we were agreeing that freedom is at stake. And it's the witness of organizations such as PEN, which give me hope. So I just want to say thank you so much for everything you're doing and wish you all the best for this evening and for your work more widely. And hand over to Burhan. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I am Burhan Sonmez, the president of PEN International, the world's largest association of writers. I'm pleased to welcome you to this event focusing on the creative legacy of Daphne Caruana Galizia, organized together with St. John's Waterloo, PEN Malta, English PEN, Irish PEN, Scottish PEN, and Wales PEN Cymru. Daphne Caruana Galizia was Malta's leading investigative journalist and anti-corruption campaigner. She was killed almost 5 years ago to the day, when a car bomb was detonated as she drove away from her home. She was 53 years old. Those who killed Daphne wanted to silence her, yet the opposite happened. Her voice resonates more than ever. As we will discuss today, her life and work are at the heart of numerous poems, books, artworks, plays, and documentaries. They all bear testament to the impact Daphne continues to have on writers and artists around the world. As writers, we use our words, our pens, to continue to be the voice of an extraordinary colleague who dared to stand up against the highest levels of corruption. Daphne was a fierce defender of free speech, and for this, she paid the ultimate price. It is Daphne's voice that we seek to amplify in our writings, and when we call for an end to impunity for the killings of journalists and writers. For those of us here today and for countless thousands around the world, Daphne's legacy lives on. It lives on because her words and the values she embodied remain as relevant today as they did 5 years ago. It lives on because impunity is still a real threat to the work of journalists in Malta and across the world. The PEN community stands with Daphne and her family. We will continue to write about Daphne and will not rest her until full justice and accountability for her murder and the corruption she exposed have been achieved. It is now my honor to introduce Corinne Vella, Daphne's sister, and the representative of the Daphne Caruana Galizia Foundation. Corinne will be joined by her niece, Mallia.
Thank you, Burhan, and good evening to everybody at St. John's Waterloo, in Malta, in London, and around the world. Thank you for being here, and thank you for paying tribute to Daphne. The reason we have been invited to join you is to talk about how Daphne's creative legacy and how literature can be used as a form of resistance, as a way of keeping somebody's voice alive. We have been very fortunate as a family to have had the support of various PEN organizations over the years. The English PEN in particular for bringing together this event tonight, PEN International for supporting us all along, and the various PEN organizations, and more recently PEN Malta, which was set up in the wake of Daphne's murder, which we have been very pleased to see. We know through our own experience that creative work can be a form of resistance in itself. And I say this because the lesser known part of Daphne's work was her creative side. Her journalism has become known now very widely, and almost anywhere you might go in the world, somebody somewhere is going to have known about that work. And it is a great misfortune that work only became known because Daphne was killed. It took her murder for her work to be brought to such a wide audience. But the lesser known part of her work was her creative side, the bit that people never really saw was, her creative life, how she loved beautiful things, how she created a wonderful home, a beautiful garden. And she had set up a magazine, which she called Taste and Flair, which would bring what she cared about to a wider audience. She set up that magazine in 2004, and her last issue was, in effect, the foundation's first one. In October 2017, Daphne was already working on a new issue of her magazine, Taste and Flair, which was going to be published in November. She did not live to see that happen. But when she was killed, as a form of tribute to her, her sons wanted to take that magazine to print and to bring it to its usual audience. It was a struggle because we had very little to work with, but we were blessed to have so many friends who were regularly involved in that magazine and who knew what Daphne wanted and who helped us make all of that happen. So photographers remembered pictures they had taken, people who cooked for the magazine said that the work was ready. Writers came up and said, well, I was working on an article, do you want me to finish it? So it all came together. And the 104th issue of Daphne's magazine was, in actual fact, her last personal one. And in the editorial that was published in that magazine, her son said, we know our mother would have been pleased with the results. This issue of Taste and Flair is our tribute to her. Bringing it to you has brought us joy, and we hope it does the same for you too. And because of that message, the very act of publication, bringing Daphne's work to her audience, even though she was not here to do it herself, received a really strong reaction from people. The magazine sold out very, very quickly. We still get requests for copies from people who missed it at the time. And we thought, well, why don't we do another one? People were interested. We said, let's try and put it out there. And so we did. We managed to produce a Christmas issue under the most dire of circumstances. And then it went on from there. We continued every month putting that magazine out there simply because we wanted to continue Daphne's legacy. And without realizing it, what we were doing was in actual fact pushing back against the people who had tried to silence her. Because by trying to kill her, what they wanted to do was silence her voice. And by pushing back, by publishing that magazine, continuing to put out there the things that mattered to her, the things that she cared about, her editorial focus remains as a guide for us. What we were in effect doing was bringing her creative legacy out to a wider audience, continuing to talk about beauty and about color and light in what was a very, very dark time. And over the years, as long as we have continued to produce this magazine, we have realized how, in effect, we are protecting her legacy and fighting back against the people who wanted to silence her. And when the foundation was set up, it became the publisher of the magazine. And now the next generation is involved in its production. Megan here, I did the magazine myself. Megan has now started work on it as well. And we continue to bring that forward. So when people killed Daphne, they thought they would keep her quiet, but through her magazine, we've continued. She managed to produce 104 issues of that magazine, including one which was published posthumously. And only this month, only today, in fact, we've managed to produce the 150th issue of that magazine. It's our small contribution towards keeping her legacy alive. And we thought that for this event, because of its nature, talking about creativity and beauty and poetry and writing in general, we thought we would include two small pieces of Daphne's writing, which might show this audience a different side to her. People who only know her through her journalistic work will see a different side to her through this piece of writing. So I'd like to invite Megan to read those two pieces for our audience.
Thanks, Corinne. First of all, thank you everyone. Like Cora said, it's fantastic that this event is happening. It's so important to carry on Daphne's legacy in this way, sorry. So one of the pieces I actually picked out for this is from a very early edition of Flair. So it's back before Taste and Flair became one magazine. Daphne was producing Taste and she was also producing Flair. This is from the second issue, so autumn 2005. Well, I'd like to say before, I actually grew up with Taste and Flair. I was only 4 years old when Daphne started producing it. And so it's always been a part of my life. I looked forward to it every month, even if I couldn't read at the time. I loved looking at the pictures. Then as I grew older, I started looking at the back issues, and but here I am helping Cora carry on, basically. This piece is basically from an article called Soften the Look. Daphne had a very particular decorating style. She loved eclectic style, basically picking out things that make her room show a person's personality, I think. And I hope this piece reflects it, at least I think it does. So this is what Daphne wrote. It's crucial to remember that you possess your rooms and not vice versa. You're a real life person with favorite objects, books that you love, objects that you've hunted down on your travels and in curious little shops, photographs of family and friends, wonderful textiles that you bought in India and don't know what to do with, antique boxes that hold your odds and ends, chairs and cupboards inherited from your grandmother and that you don't want to get rid of because they remind you of her and you like them because of it. You mustn't let any sterile scheme of perfection rid you of all that makes you what you are, of all that soothes your soul and your spirit after a long, tiring day. So that's from Flair. The other piece I picked out is, well, we picked out actually, is an extract from Daphne's blog, Running Commentary. It's from August 2017, and it's basically showing her love of gardens. So, this is what Daphne wrote. I love gardens, mysterious magical gardens full of nooks and crannies, the equivalent of rambling old houses, packed with rackety furniture, and old curios brought back by antecedents from the peregrinations. Gardens that are collections of plants of all kinds, tall and small, wild and tame, big-leafed and spiked, tangle-branched and swooping. The hard wiring for this pattern in my preference was probably, I now realize, set by the time I was in primary school, and my imagination captured by Frances Hodgson's Burnett's The Secret Garden. So thank you very much. And we're looking forward to hearing from the other speakers this evening.
Thank you, dear Corinne and Megan. In 2021, the pen community welcomed a new pen center in Malta. I'm now pleased to introduce Immanuel Mifsud, writer, poet, and president of PEN Malta.
Thank you for this invitation and for setting up this very important event. I speak as the president of the Malta Center, Malta Pen Center. There had been previous attempts to establish a pen center in Malta. I remember one such endeavor in 2003, but back then writers did not feel harassed, not even censored, And journalists had their own association, and they too must have felt safe. Although we should remember that Daphne herself had already been targeted a number of times because of what she was writing. There were 2 cases of censorship against writers, one in 2005 and a more serious one some years later, which led to some protests, but still there were no concerns serious enough to call for a pen center. And I remember that Daphne herself was one of the more vociferous in protesting in this case, in this second case of censorship against a writer. After Daphne's assassination, ideas changed, and although I was not part of the original core group that set the ball rolling for the setting up of the Malta Pen Center, but I do know that Daphne's assassination had a lot to do with making people realize that there needed to be a body which speaks up for harassed writers, journalists, and artists. Something which we are doing because we feel it is very important not only to fight for justice for Daphne, a fight still going on 5 years after her being killed, but also for the benefit of all writers and journalists and artists now and also in the future. So again, may I thank the organizers for this wonderful event, and I leave it up to the following the speakers who will be speaking after me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Immanuel. When my colleagues and my colleagues in Pen Malta and I made a call for poetry written for and because of Daphne, we weren't surprised to receive many responses. Art, poetry, film, all of these are reacting to what is happening, and they are bearing witness. So art records, and it is a legacy. I'm honored to share with you my offering. It is called Imitation of a Sonnet, Still with Particles of Gold. It is after Nina Mingya Poles and Daphne Caruana Galizia. There is a richness in knowing more than one. This intermingling cannot be explained. The kind of secret language, the way I say Uweya rather than no way. A strange sensation in my mouth on waking. Flash news broadcast over all channels could never sit well with me. Only to speak Mela, a woman, Mara, a mother, Delit. What does it mean, she asks in her language. My faceless friend explains, and I watch another face fall. I try to make myself remember. I try to forget that walls ask scrubbed out questions. Back home, my languages bite a foreign tongue. Thank you.
Ottubru. Għadni kemm qatt ma' din l-iskrivanija, qisu l-bieraħ u mhuwiex. Nixtieq ngħidlek x'għaddejt minnu llum, x'għadda minn għalija. Xtaqt mort dawra bil-karozza għaddija, sawn, kemm immurru niġi. Sa fejn il-bini imiss is-sema u l-ajru għandu widna u l-ħajt għandu għajn. tkun trid tagħmel u tkun trid tkun. Illum xtaqt li l-klieb jieqfu jimbħu u n-nies jieqfu jgħidu u kollox jieqaf ħemda. Xtaqt biss skiet u kwiet. Imma l-karozzi tal-pulizija ġew hawn, smajt? Għalija. Għal xejn qedtilhom fejn imorru, għal fejn? Ta' xejn qedtilhom li issa hawn m'hawnx x'jiġu jagħmlu. Ġew il-karozzi tat-tifi tan-nar, ġew il-bdiewa, ġie kulħadd ħajara lili jaraw minni. Ma ċawn xtara u xtifli. Ħlif il-kliem b'tifsira u oħra li jibqa' jomodu toma ta' dmuħ min jafu. Xtaqt il-ħaqt ktibt fuq bomba u spirti u spirti. Imma kważi qed kollox qabel fil-linji skuri u bejniethom. Fil-kliem li jett u meċċ u li kieku nista' nerġa' ngħid u nibqa' ngħid. Imma forsi ebda ħoss mu qawwi daqs daskiet. Daqs iż-żarżira wara t-tifqija, daqs il-vojt meta tiksaħ il-qija. Da żmien jiftħu l-freżi u l-kriżantemi, taf? U din l-art għada mamda, għada la trid tara, la trid tiftaħ għajnejha. Trid tibqa' tinħasel bil-mamudijiet tad-demm ħelu. Il-wart u l-manjoli żommuhom intom, mhux iktar tagħhom Ottubru tiegħi. Tad-drabi li rid nasal u wasalt, tad-darba li wasluni fejn riduni. Għalquhom fil-kodba l-fjuri ħajsiru rieħa tfuħ l-istejjer umdi ta' dil-gżira u min irid jifhem jara li mhux kollox jiġi jmur. Xejn mu l-istess bħal qabel. Xejn mu l-istess u l-prezz jibqa' tiela x'kollox jitla' hawnhekk ma tafx. L-ewwel jitla' imbagħad imut. Għadni kemm qatt mal-iskrivanija u nixtieq nikteb kemm tmeninijiet kellna għaddew u marru. Nixtieq nikteb li żmien tar u diż-żiffa qed taħini. Ma saru 8 u għadni ma tħallx id-dar.
Tmiżżed l-arja u s-sema tfaħħam. L-art tħamret u tħamru l-għajnejn. U int ja pajjiżi li qasadek taf x'kulur taqbad ix-xitt, oddok inħnaqt, oddok inftaqt. Tistenna li jitħammar ukoll wiċċ min baqa' igeddes u jmesmes u jissaħħam sakemm tnawarlu moħħu u maradlu anki l-mudullun. Int, kuġinuwi, tsiti int. Int ħatni, oħti int. Int it-tifel bil-qiegħda ħdejja fuq il-bank tal-iskola. Int is-sieħba li paspart magħha fuq it-suntier tal-knisja, fil-ġonna ta' dari, fuq wara tal-klassi. Tgħid meta bdejna mpinġu kollox aħmar u blu u ġennibna l-bqija tal-qawsalla. Tgħid meta se nifmu, qatt nifmu li min sikket lilek illum kapaċi għada jimmekni imqarjek nieqaf inċabċablu. Li min beżaq f'wiċċi illum kapaċi għada iżeblaħ lil uliedek. Kif ma ndunajniex li waqt li int u jien konna għadna nitlewmu fuq limu l-isbaħ u x'l-aħmar jew il-blu, kien hemm min ħata fil-bqija tal-kuluri u ħarab bil-kaxxa b'kollox.
Hi, Thanks everybody for coming here tonight. I am from Scottish Pen, but I actually lived in Malta for 12 years, which is my strong connection with Malta. I was living there when Daphne was assassinated. There's an echo going on here. And was very involved with a women's-led pressure group called Occupy Justice that I'm still involved with today. This story is fiction, but it's based on fact. It's dedicated to Daphne Caruana Galizia. It's dedicated to her incredible family. And it's also dedicated to this women's-led pressure group, Occupy Justice. The story is about an action that we did in 2019. So although it's a fictionalized account, it's rooted in what actually happened. It's called Unvanquished. A thug of thugs and thief of thieves took it upon himself to organize a flower show to placate the populace. In a country where people loved their mothers more than their wives, and where a gift at the end of the day erased all mortal sins, flowers were a surefire winner. Let the petals bloom, he laughed, just like our country. 2 minutes away from where locals and tourists gasped at the colours spreading out across the palace floor, there was a monument. 3 bronze men stood in stolid testament to faith, fortitude, and civilization, and how the thug of thugs defended these. This statue is our jewel in the crown, he hissed, gyrating his hips with a bump and a grind. This belongs to us and to all our loyal citizens, he proclaimed, his voice booming far and wide across every inch of social media touched by his dry, cracked lips. His declamation was met by cackles spewing out from wizened shapes whose form resembled something vaguely human, but so distorted by habitual groveling that it was scarcely possible to distinguish men from women, children from the broken adults they'd become. There are happy people everywhere you look, he grinned, and mouthed a large-sized LOL, his face writhing with the ache of merriment. The situation is desperate, he howled, his sides splitting with the magnitude of his wit. A small group of women who bore an unmistakable likeness to human beings joined with the crowds who came forth to scoop up armfuls of flowers because freedom is all about grabbing things for free. But this small group of women who are unmistakably human beings gave donations of money and said thank you as they lifted up these gifts of Mother Nature and, trying hard not to laugh as they did so, carried them just a few meters away from where the free-for-all was in full swing. Every day, these women, born in the likeness of human beings, place flowers and candles and photos and words of resistance at the feet of the bronze men who gaze towards the law courts. Each night, the nays of misrule stole them away. Morality for these minions of misconduct had been misshapen through years of being chipped away. Their minds were as gnarled as their hands. One Monday, in the middle of a normal afternoon, the sound of an explosion ripped through harsh rock. Flesh, bone, clothing, last-minute things stuffed into pockets, a mobile phone, a laptop. All the infinity of moments making up one single life were torn and shredded and strewn across the fields, the road, the pathways leading to the home the car had come from, with its door flung wide open as the sun, barefoot, began to run and run and run. She deserved it, rasped the vicious servants who prized their chains as signs of liberty. Let the witch burn, they chanted, cold eyes ablaze and shriveled hearts on fire. The king of crudity stoked the flames and relished the heat of flickering tongues against his skin. It turned him on. Let them eat thorns, he sighed, and rolled out his floral carpet like a drunken man who, grappling with his trousers, lets his bladder spray out without giving a toss for passers-by. In consideration to the solemnity of the occasion, the woman made several short journeys from the palace to the monument, which, barely noticed by folks scurrying about their business as usual, had suddenly become a source of national pride. Neglected by all but the pigeons, the three stony-faced men had now to be protected at all costs. Bearing pansies and petunias, that day the woman blended in with all the others, not objects of derision, tormented by old men who skulked on benches, spitting out insults as repetitive as a rosary. The persistence of the woman fueled rage amongst relics of some imagined past, clinging to the victories which they had every God-given right to hold as true. Bitch, you come near me and I'll kill you. Her, fuck you and all your family. Today was Mother's Day, another reason for flowers to be bestowed in abundance. A mother had been blown to pieces in her car, but let bygones be bygones. Let's not dwell on the past. We are happy, we are joyous, we are free. This, my friends, is pure serenity. As the woman walked back and forth, thoughts meandered, as did memories. Although it wasn't a memorial these women desired, nothing unusual. Simply the right to speak your mind without fear of retribution. Simply the right to criticize and not be torn apart. Simply the right to shout at the top of your voice that this is wrong and this is wrong beyond wrong. Their demands were simple, normal. Those who assassinated a journalist and decimated democracy must be caught and punished for their crimes. Between the crowds relaxing in the evening sun, the woman placed the flowers where they always put them, in the soil, in front of the monument, directly opposite the law courts, where those on trial passed silver to the judges who made travesties of justice look like child's play. As darkness fell and lovers leaned against each other, the three bronze figures kept their gaze ahead. At their feet, but bolder than the lands they'd conquered, the pansies and petunias began to take shape. Invicta, breathed the flowers, and the breath was steady. Invicta, whispered the flowers, and the wind picked up the tune. Invicta, said the flowers, and the sound reverberated from every shadowed corner of the city. Invicta, they declared, each one on its own, while all together, with a power that rose up through the roots of the earth, warming the hearts of the stone men, dancing with the leaves on sleep-dazzled trees that coursed across the seas and up, up, up into the sky until the sheer force of its unshakable truth radiated magnificently right the way across the startled universe.
Thank you, dear Lizzie. Just for your information, all those videos you see here today will be available online afterwards. Journalist and member of PEN Malta, hÉireann recently wrote, directed, and produced They Blew Her Up, and a play focusing on Daphne's murder and the cover-ups and the political scandals that ensued in Malta. We will now listen to hÉireann and watch a powerful extract of the play.
I decided to write the play They Blew Her Up towards the end of November 19, when the story of Daphne Caruana Galizia unraveled in one day, and we realized that not only was Daphne killed because of the work she did, but there was a clear cover-up for the people who were behind this. And this made me very angry as both a journalist and a citizen of this country. So I set about writing a play. It is the second play I've written, and I went to the protagonists. I spoke to people who knew Daphne, I spoke to her family, and I spoke to my own sources. And I believe, we managed to create a project here which goes beyond the headlines of newspapers, beyond websites. As we know, especially when we look at the Ukraine war, people go tired of headlines. We should never be tired of reading such stories. So I wanted to make sure that I use another medium, which is theatre, as another arm of journalism, call it life journalism if you want. And I think through this play, we have managed to tell the story, one of the most despicable stories of our generation. And I think, you know, sometimes we need to all take a look at ourselves because it's very easy for us as journalists, as editors, to just move from one story to the other without realizing that justice has not yet been served. And this is what I'm trying to do with this play.
The morning before my mother was killed, she went to Palazzo Parisio, as she liked to do, to scour magazines over her coffee. As she walked around, looking at the gardens, I remember it was beautiful that day. We had these terrapins in the pond at home, and they were just eating everything in their sight. So my mother joked about dumping them in the pond at Palazzo Parisio. And I had this image in my head of Daphne Caruana Galizia sneaking into Palazzo Parisio and dumping these turtles. Anyway, on October 16th, I had woken up at around 8 a.m. My mum just made us a coffee. We both worked through the morning, skipping lunch. Well, when it was looking like I was going to miss lunch, my mum made me a plate of mozzarella and tomatoes as she uploaded her last blog post. And then she had to go to the bank. She actually insisted on going to the bank because she didn't like discussing her banking details over the phone. Yeah, she was afraid it was being tapped. So then she left the house, and she had actually come back to the house because she'd forgotten the checkbook. Yeah, my father used to have to give my mother his checkbook with like the first 20 checks blank signed by him, because she couldn't pay for anything since her credit cards were frozen. So then I waved her goodbye, and she closed the front door to our house, which is really heavy, by the way. It's one of those old oak doors with lots of keys hanging on it. So whenever you close it, it makes this really loud. And that's the last time I saw her. Within a minute or so, I heard this massive blast. And the glass to our house, it rattled like thunder or fireworks hitting the house. I knew it was a car bomb. What else could it be? The dog started barking and barking and barking, and then it looked at me as though it was forewarning me about the horror I was about to witness. I opened the front door to our house. I remember the sun shining brightly on my face. For a second, I felt all the blood just drained from my body. And then I bolted down the lane. I saw smoke rising, at which point I said, "Yep, it's a bomb." I tried to call my mother on her phone, but the line was dead. And as I continued running down the lane, I saw that there was fire on the side of the road. And there were patches of fire on the actual road. And bits of car parts everywhere. There was fragments of metal, bits of plastic, glass, and human flesh. The tree on the side of the road was on fire. Where's the car? I kept thinking, where's the car? And my eyes followed the tower of smoke to this fireball in a field. I knew that was my mum's car. I ran around the driver's side and I saw that the door was blown open. And I tried to reach into the car, but the flames, they burnt my face. And I expected to see something, you know, like a silhouette or just a corpse, anything. But there was nothing. Just flames. At that point, I tried to look for a stick or something to try and wedge the door open. And instead of a stick, I saw my mother's leg up to the knee. It was blown off at the knee, sort of just above the knee. And then I said, forget it. There's no way anyone could have survived that. She's dead. And beyond the dusty smoke inhaling my mum's car, I saw this woman standing on the far side of the road. And she was holding this little girl's hand. And this little girl, she was crying, she was bawling. And the woman shouted at me. She shouted, what do we do? I just said, call the police. And then they disappeared. I never saw them again. And then these two policemen show up. And I mean, these guys, they were fucking kids, you know. They had no idea what to do. They just came out of the car with this fire extinguisher, which they just dropped to the ground. And I remember I shouted at them. I said, what are you doing? And then I tried to pick up the fire extinguisher, and the policeman just said, look, there's nothing we can do. The other policeman was crying. And the worst part about all of it was this ear-piercing sound of the horn. It was like non-stop. I mean, it didn't stop until the sound went out. And it was like just this assault on all your senses, you know. It was the smell, the sight, your ears. It was horrible. I tried to call my father, who didn't pick up. My two brothers didn't pick up. And then I eventually got through to my auntie, and I told her, come to Bidnija now. They put a bomb in Mummy's car.
I think that was great for a great journalist. As we know all too well, journalism was Daphne's life. Her blog, where she brought most of her major stories, attracted a daily readership that averaged 400,000 and sometimes up to 1 million. I'm now pleased to introduce Robert Zammit from the Maltese community in London, who will read an extract of Daphne's blog.
The piece I am about to read is called Do What Is Right. Daphne posted this on her blog, Running Commentary, on the 3rd of March, 2013, a few days before that year's general election. That was also a few days before she was arrested and questioned by the police for 2 hours for breaching the so-called political silence on Malta's so-called day of reflection, the day before the general election. The piece goes as follows. It is my innate sense of justice, my need to know that what is right will win out at the end. That is, other than a belief in its politics, the main factor motivating the way I vote. I cannot bear the thought of injustice, still less the reality of it. It's true that life is unfair and that much of it can't be helped. But where I can do anything to avoid unfairness or to set it straight, then I will. There are situations which create so much disillusionment that they can seriously undermine our faith in human nature. The hope that good will triumph over bad, that people will get what they deserve, that those who don't deserve things will get them, and that fortune will favor the brave and not the unworthy. Evidence all around us that this does not necessarily happen can make us angry. But rather than giving in to anger or disillusionment, it is better and more consoling to know that we have done our best to avert the triumph of the undeserving, in which those who served Malta ill are rewarded, while those who have served Malta well are punished. I just don't think that is right. Any situation is intolerable to me in which the lazy and undeserving benefit completely from the strenuous efforts of the hardworking and the committed. It is thoroughly unfair.
Thank you, dear Robert. Another pen center moved by Daphne's life and work is Wales Pen Cymru. I'm pleased to introduce Aurelia Dondo, Europe Program Coordinator at PEN International, who will speak on their behalf.
I'm pleased to read 2 poems written by our friends at Wales Pen Committee in honor of Daphne's work, memory, and legacy. The first poem is by Mena Elfin, poet, playwright, and president of Wells Pen Cymru. Pendle, pendulum. I am of Daphne Caruana Galizia. Malta and Cymru, both kith and kin, two small countries with large hearts and headstrong too. Pen in Welsh is head, and from Penzance to Penrith, how wide open the headwinds, mythic, in thin places too, at times dizzy with Pendrell. And she, whose calling was the headland of humankind, we bear witness to her loss. Follow her lead, hold on tight, her pen now in our hands, the displaced pendulum restored. And through our sorrow, we know her truth-telling heralds a new headline. Pen is a name called hope. The second poem is by Caroline Stockford, poet, translator, and board member of Wells Pen Cymru. Daphne's sons. It is too late to bring her back, but the acorns are everywhere, scattered in the valley, and they will send pillars up into the soft, bright, undarkened mornings, where suns come up and are beacons to us, like these three trees. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Aurelia. Children's author and illustrator Cataldo was Daphne's friend. In 2020, he published Fearless, the story of Daphne Caruana Galizia. I'm pleased to introduce him.
My friendship with Daphne started through letters, those quaint pen and paper things. People asked me what being friends with her was like. Daphne was a wonderful, flawed, and complex individual. She could be the funniest and most intelligent person you've ever spoken to, certainly one of the warmest. As with most intelligent people, as people who followed her writing can attest, she could say one sentence that changes the way you see the world. She could also, at times, be irritatingly sure of herself and demanding. Yes, certainly that. She was extremely demanding of herself. So she expected the same standard of the people she cared about. I've always felt that we, and by we, I mean everyone around her, her readers, her colleagues, fellow journalists, the Maltese people in general, have let her down. So I found a blog entry where she speaks about the Labour Party, but also about us all, about how we didn't object loudly enough when Daphne stuck her neck out. I won't read the whole article, just a section of it, but you can look it up and read the rest. It's dated 24th May 2016. The Labour Party has also encouraged prurient and offensive discussion about my private life and private business in a manner that truly must be a first in the democratic world outside Baku and Beijing. For it is in fascist and totalitarian dictatorships that journalists are deliberately exposed to systematic campaigns of slander organized by politicians. It is symptomatic of Malta's proto-democracy that lots of people here don't understand the different roles of journalists and politicians and rank the two as somehow equal in an equal battle. Yet, it is the role of journalists in a democracy to scrutinize politicians. It is not the role of politicians to scrutinize journalists. The first is democracy, the second, fascism. In September 2012, the Labour Party put my face on billboards across the island, among the faces of significant nationalist politicians who included the Prime Minister at the time. There were no words on that billboard. The image was considered sufficiently effective in getting its abusive message across. The Labour Party achieved its aim. People began to recognize me who had never recognized me before. They slowed their cars in traffic to stare at me. They pulled down their car windows to shout abuse. One of them even filed hit and run charges against me in conspiracy with a corrupt police officer in a case that was thrown out of court as false, but not before it was plastered all over the front page of L'Horizon with an enormous picture of my face. And then there were the ordinary, but not particularly bright people who respond to branding in predictable ways, and who, because they saw my face amongst those politicians, had me down as politician too. You would be astonished to know just how many people actually think genuinely that I am a member of Parliament. When told that, no, I am just a journalist, confusion clouds their face. Jiena sibtek fil-politika. Oh, I thought you were a politician. Then why do Labour always go on about you? Well, exactly. The Institute of Maltese Journalists did not release a statement of protest when my face went up on that political billboard in the worst of the political tension leading up to the general election. And no other journalist raised the alarm or wrote an article about how shocking this was. There were several reasons for this, including the three primary reasons I mentioned further up. But the real reason was that many of them were too busy becoming enamored of Joseph Muscat and the Labour Party to see the flashing red light of danger. Come on, it's only Daphne. She deserves it. She's such a bitch. We can say that about her, but if we say it about a local singer, then PBS, Danisa Labristi, and the Labour Party will issue statements. And of course, it's not a warning sign about how the Labour Party stands generally on the matter of freedom of expression and the free press. Matarash, as if. It's only how the Labour Party stands on the matter of Daphne. But it was a warning sign. Only fools couldn't have seen that. The Labour Party isn't interested in me as a person. It is only interested in me as a journalist. It is what I write that bothers Labour, not what I look like, though it seeks to impress some people that what it really is bothered about is my physical appearance and what sort of friends I have. On the matter of the Labour Party's attitude towards basic civil liberties, respect for rights of the individual, tolerance of criticism and press freedom, I have, for the last 26 years or so, been the canary in the coal mine. But as long as I was singled out for assault, no other journalist bothered. It was as though Hitler's men had come along and carted off the lone Jew, and the other Jews said to themselves that, well, it must be because she committed some crime, because she always says the wrong thing and deserves it. And of course, it's not because Hitler and his men are in any way virulently anti-Semitic. So it's never going to be a problem for the rest of us.
Thank you, dear Gatalo. Friends at Irish Pen know very well the threats that journalists, and particularly women journalists, face for speaking the truth. I'm pleased to introduce Leanne Mills, writer and chair of the board of Irish Pen.
Thank you, Burhan. Hello, everyone. It's an enormous privilege to speak here in these beautiful surroundings. And I want to say thanks and congratulations to the organizers, especially Euchar and Aurelia. The Freedom to Write campaign in Ireland was an informal group of writers who held occasional readings to promote the work of imprisoned writers and writers at risk. We hadn't been for existence for very long when Daphne was murdered. Up until then, we'd been dealing with writers in distant authoritarian regimes, but this was different. Malta is in Europe. Irish names were on the list of people exposed by Daphne and her colleagues working on the Panama Papers. So her murder was shockingly close to home. When we were invited to take over the running of Irish Pen by an outgoing committee who had become largely inactive, Daphne's murder was a strong contributing factor in our decision. The alternative was that Irish Pen would cease to exist after nearly 100 years. But what really clinched it was when we met people from Pen International and English Pen at the first anniversary vigil for Daphne's murder here in London. So there were meetings and discussions and a lot of encouragement from other Pen centres that helped us to decide. And we decided to go ahead and form a new, more structured all-Ireland organisation, Irish Pen, hÉireann. Our patron is the President of Ireland, Michael D. Higgins. We have our own roll call of murdered journalists in Ireland. Veronica Guerin in 1996. In Northern Ireland, which is part of the UK, Martin O'Hagan was killed in 2001. To this day, no one has been held accountable for his murder. Lyra McKee was killed as recently as 2019. Justice has been slow in coming in her case too. There are codes of silence, and some individuals are protected because of their relationship with the police. A number of other journalists in Northern Ireland have been subjected to recent threats to them and to their families from paramilitaries and from criminal gangs. We have the bizarre situation where threats considered to be serious are delivered to the journalist in question by the police service of Northern Ireland, almost as if they're acting as agents of the perpetrators. Yet those perpetrators are not pursued and no real protection is given. Is it only a matter of time until another journalist loses his or her life? We believe strongly that legal protections for journalists are essential and that justice for Daphne, when it comes, as come it must, will be the first step in that direction. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Celia Dufresne, who is our next reader. Multiple award-winning poet, playwright, biographer, novelist, and librettist in both languages, Irish and English. Celia is a founder member and former chair of Aontas na Scríbhneoirí Gaeilge and a dynamic, active member and supporter of Irish Pen.
Thank you very much, Leah Gurmila Mahagut. Is more an honor dom Laurton Shaw and you, Markuj than Okod Shaw. I'm really delighted to be here today as part of this event. I'm going to read a very short poem I wrote in memory of Daphne. The poem is in Irish and I have an English translation of it. It's very short, as I say, and there are 3 ideas in it. One is to celebrate the work of Daphne. The second is, it refers to Daphne in myth, where she is turned into a laurel tree and how the laurel becomes a symbol of victory. Excuse me. And the third idea is how in Nepal, paper made from the bark of the laurel tree is so durable, it is used to record religious texts. Laurel, in memory of Daphne Caruana Galizia. Your work stands firm against the wind hereabouts. In far-off lands, paper is made from your bark, that your words be preserved in sacred texts. Laurus, I Gravina Daphne Caruana Galizia. Shasan the hÉireann godangan, I gunye na gwiha I gongar. I gain gender pauper de the church, go gave neater de vrihra I dexana giaga. Gurmila Mag.
Thank you, dear Leah and Celia. As Daphne's voice resonates in our work, it's time to listen to her once again in her own words. I'm pleased to introduce Anne Dingby from the Maltese community in London, who will read another extract of Daphne's blog.
Thank you. This text was written on the 5th June 2017, 2 days after the 2017 Maltese general election. And Daphne titled it, Right and Wrong Are Not a Popularity Contest. I know, you don't have to tell me, it's the reason I do it, that this website has, over the last 4 years, become a gathering post or rallying point for decent people who feel frightened and threatened at the rise, growth, and spread of amorality, which is not by any means the same as immorality. I know why you come here, because lots of you tell me, but I knew it instinctively even before you did. You come here to feel normal in a sea of insanity, where the crowd cheers the commissioner of police for failing to take action against a corrupt cabinet minister and the prime minister's chief of staff, where supporters of the party in power celebrate and have their picture taken on the steps of a bank which launders money because it's linked to the politicians they support. Where even educated people who have had all their advantages in life vote a corrupt political party into power for the narrow reason that they're renting out flats to buyers of Maltese citizenship who never set foot in them. 4 years ago, I wrote a piece calling out the incoming Nationalist Party leader for beginning a speech with 30,000 people can't be wrong. Of course they can be, I wrote. 1 million people can be wrong. The rightness or wrongness of a fact, action, or opinion is not established by the number of people who believe it, do it, or hold it. One thing is certain, you are not going to change amoral feminism by pandering to it or by making its practitioners believe they are right. That simply perpetuates the situation. And the Nationalist Party has been guilty of this too, because the mentality is endemic. Nobody can seek to understand Maltese politics or Maltese society without first understanding amoral feminism, which shapes and drives both, and which, it has to be said, has ruined both too. But meanwhile, remember that yours is the acceptable attitude. And no matter what others tell you, the behavior we are seeing now is not normal or decent simply because it has won. Malta is in a dangerous place, and now we can no longer say that it is corrupt politicians who have brought it to this point. For it can no longer be denied that those corrupt politicians are a reflection of society. There is something else I should say before I go. When people taunt you or criticize you for being negative, or for failing to go with their flow, for not adopting an attitude of benign tolerance to their excesses, bear in mind always that they and not you are the ones who are in the wrong. What they want most of all is for you to join the chorus of approval, or at least to shut up about it so they can feel better about themselves. Because despite all that they say, they struggle with their self-respect. They want people to admire them so that they can admire themselves. Despite behavior that is so far away from admirable, it isn't even on the horizon. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Anne. Throughout this event, we have explored how poetry and literature can be used as tools to advocate freedom of expression and ensure justice and accountability for Daphne and her family. It's now my honor to introduce writer, filmmaker, broadcaster, and English pen member, Juliet Jacques. Juliet will provide concluding remarks on the power of words and why writers and artists feel compelled to write about Daphne and others who are being persecuted and attacked simply for speaking out.
Thank you, Burhan. It's a real honor to be asked to introduce, to speak to you all about Daphne and her work. So I want to say this. Hope has always been a hard thing to hold, and it's getting ever harder. It's especially difficult in societies that only pretend to be democratic, but are widely understood to be oligarchies, in which governments can only expect to be elected if they demonstrate their willingness to serve commercial interests, and if they please the media moguls whose outlets propagandize for the rich. For those of us who care about freedom of speech and understand why the thinkers of the Enlightenment place such a premium on it, it's recently been dispiriting to see the bad faith use of the concept, often by employees of those media moguls, to dismiss criticism from those who suggest that they do not speak truth to power, but tell lies for power. In a climate in which politics and media collude to manufacture consent for the unjust system under which we live, whilst obscuring or eliding its actual and deeper workings, we need journalists like Daphne Caruana Galizia more than ever. Daphne understood that journalism should not spring from advocating a set of interests, or even those of a political party, but from a determination to expose corruption and stand against cruelty, no matter what the cost. That corruption and cruelty was endemic, as Daphne knew all too well. The policeman who arrested her at a protest against the Maltese government in 1982, when she was just 18, ended up becoming Speaker of the House of Representatives of Malta for the business-friendly Labour Party, whose close relationships with domestic and international corporations she explored on her running commentary blog. This secured a bigger readership than the expensively financed mainstream press, and threats were posted on its comment section daily. That was the cheapest end of a coordinated campaign of intimidation in which the public were encouraged to harass her, she was accused of making things up, her dog was killed, and her front door and then her house were set on fire. None of this deterred Daphne. nor did the 47 libel suits that she was facing at the end of her life. This came after she alleged that hÉireann, a company based in a tax haven in Panama, was owned by the wife of Malta's Prime Minister, Joseph Muscat. She had been fearlessly investigating the links between the Maltese government and companies set up to manage assets abroad, as had been revealed in the Panama Papers. For that, she was killed. The method was a car bomb, set to go off as she went to the bank to get her account unfrozen after ministers had filed vexatious lawsuits against her 5 years ago this month. Daphne's life and death should remind us of the most fundamental principle regarding freedom of speech, that nobody should be killed, ever, for what they write, but also that the biggest threats to freedom of speech come from the top, made by people with wealth in positions of power, but even more importantly, positions of impunity. Daphne's final words were stark. She wrote, "There are crooks everywhere you look. The situation is desperate." There are, and it is. It's very fashionable for journalists to talk about polarization now, and particularly about polarization between left and right. But Daphne's work reminds us that the real divide is between rich and poor, and that you do not have to be aligned to a particular ideology or movement to point out how it's widening. It's incumbent on us then, as writers and as citizens of a globalized society, to take up her principles and her stories, as 45 journalists in 15 countries have done since her death. The trials against the corporate interests accused of ordering her assassination are ongoing, and it's easy to despair about how little consequence those exposed in the Panama Papers seem to have faced, and also, more broadly, about how contemporary governments tend to deal with such scandals by insolently brazing them out, often abetted by a compliant media who minimize or ignore such issues. But protests against Daphne's murder and the lack of official response eventually deposed Muscat, and the best journalism can still provide impetus for mass movements against systemic corruption. That relies on us not to take the easiest or most lucrative paths through an industry, but to remember the ideals for which writers and artists of all sorts have fought for centuries, to ask who really holds power and how, and to tell the truth about it, no matter what it costs. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Juliet. Thank you all for joining us tonight, in person or remotely. Such a display of solidarity is a tribute to Daphne's courage, her fearlessness, and to the impact she had, not just in Malta, but across the world. As writers, artists, and activists, we will continue to write about Daphne and, like her, speak truth to the power. Thank you.